Lena Roth was just another solo traveler chasing beauty through the Icelandic wilderness, until she stepped off the trail and vanished without a trace. When she was found, she didn't remember what happened. But the way she spoke, the way she looked at people, wasn't quite the same. And when she started drawing ancient runes in her sleep, ones no living soul should know, her friends realized she hadn't come back alone. What did she see in that misty canyon? And why does she whisper, "They're still watching," when she thinks no one's listening? Lena Roth had always been the kind of traveler who looked for silence. Not just quiet, but something deeper, the kind of hush you only find in places where the world hasn't been touched in centuries. That's why she chose Iceland. Not the tourist-thick Golden Circle or the crowds at Blue Lagoon, but the raw, volcanic wilderness of the highlands, where moss crawled over rocks like old secrets and steam hissed from the ground itself. It was her 30th solo trip. She'd blogged her way through Patagonia, photographed sunrise from Bhutan, and survived dengue in a Malaysian hospital. But this trip, she said to her 30,000 Instagram followers, was for her. No photo shoots. No guides. Just Lena, her boots, and a satellite phone that never quite found service. The last post anyone saw was a picture of her standing on a black sand ridge, her face turned toward a wall of fog rolling down a far-off mountain. 2 days later, the rangers started looking for her. The satellite phone had stopped transmitting. A group of hikers spotted a red sleeping bag tangled in brush by the edge of a ravine, but no Lena. They sent drones, dogs, and volunteers. The weather turned. Wind tore through the canyons, and the fog came thicker than ever. Locals said that area was cursed. That GPS stopped working near the lava fields. That voices sometimes called out from the rocks when no one was there. The search continued anyway, until the rescue team began to whisper that she'd either fallen into a crevasse or was hiding from something. A full 48 hours after her disappearance, just as searchers were preparing to call it off, Lena walked out of a mossy slope 2 miles from her last known location. Barefoot. Hair soaked through with dew. Not a scratch on her body. She didn't speak at first. Just looked around with an expression no one could quite place. Part wonder, part fear, part reverence. When the medics asked if she was okay, she said something they didn't understand. At first, they assumed she was disoriented. But the linguist later confirmed what she'd said, clear as day, was e.g. Sarah with acute. I saw them. They asked who they were. She only looked back toward the ravine and whispered, "You didn't hear them." Her voice was low, like the fog had followed her back and wrapped around her tongue. The hospital found no injuries, no dehydration, no frostbite. Her vitals were perfect. But she refused to call anyone. Refused to return home. When her brother arrived from New York, she greeted him politely, but not warmly, and spoke only in Icelandic. The doctors said trauma could cause language shifts. But her brother pointed out that Lena had never studied the language. Ever. He showed them texts she'd sent him just days before, fluent English, peppered with emojis and travel jokes. Now she barely touched her phone. When asked what happened out there, she'd just blink slowly and say, "You wouldn't understand." But late one night, one of the nurses walked past her room and heard Lena murmuring something with her face pressed to the window. Something that sounded like a chant. Word spread. A local folklorist offered to speak with her. Said it wasn't the first time someone had gone missing in that part of the highlands. He brought her drawings of Icelandic spirits, Huldufolk, the hidden people, said to live beneath rocks and hills. Lena stared at one image longer than the rest. Not the delicate elf-like figure, but the black, hollow-eyed shape behind it, barely visible in the mountain mist. "That one," she said. "That's who was watching." When asked how she knew, she simply replied, "Because I watched them back." Her brother tried to get her on a plane home. She refused. "I'm not ready," she said, and then, curiously, "They're not done with me yet." He left in frustration. Lena stayed. She rented a small cabin near the place she vanished. The owner said she never left during the day, but at night, lights flickered in the windows, even though the power was supposedly out. When a hiker passing through said he saw a figure walking barefoot along the ridge at dawn, they thought it was another camper. Until he showed the photo he'd snapped from a distance. It was Lena. And behind her, just visible in the mist, something darker.
There.
Watching. The news of Lena Roth's return spread fast, first through local police channels, then through Icelandic news, and eventually through international travel blogs where her followers demanded to know what had happened. But there were no answers. Only anomalies. The rescue team said she'd been located in an area that had already been searched 3 times. The coordinates of her discovery, logged by GPS, didn't make sense. They landed in the middle of a collapsed lava tube known to be inaccessible. And the photo taken by a thermal drone hours before she reappeared showed no heat signatures. Nothing. The footage was time-stamped. Verified. For all digital purposes, Lena hadn't existed in that landscape until the moment she stepped barefoot from the ravine. When Lena was finally discharged from the hospital, she didn't call anyone back in New York. Not her job, not her friends, not even her best friend and podcast co-host, Kate, who had flown out when the search first began. Kate stayed in Reykjavik after Lena's release, hoping to reconnect, to understand what had changed. But the woman who emerged wasn't the Lena she knew. It wasn't just the language, though Lena now spoke Icelandic so fluently and fluidly that she was mistaken for a native. It wasn't even the strange calmness in her movements, or the way she seemed to blink slower, like someone not entirely used to light. It was something else. A stillness. A presence. Like she was no longer surprised by the world, because she had seen beyond it. Lena took a room in a small guest house owned by a retired Icelandic couple who said she was quiet but polite, though the wife whispered to Kate one morning that she'd heard Lena whispering to the moss-covered stones in the garden behind the house. When asked what she said, the old woman only crossed herself. She wasn't speaking Icelandic, she muttered. Not anything I've ever heard. At first, Kate assumed it was trauma. Dissociation. Some psychological break triggered by isolation. But then the drawings started. Lena began to cover the walls of her room with symbols, spirals, jagged lines, delicate geometric formations that looked part runic, part mathematical. She claimed they weren't hers. That she just woke up and found them drawn on her arms, her sheets, her windowpane. One morning, Kate arrived to find a spiral etched into the frost on Lena's mirror. There were no tools in the room. No way to have drawn it from inside or out. Just frost. And the symbol. When Kate confronted her, Lena said, "They're reminders. So I don't forget." But she couldn't say who they were. Or what she wasn't supposed to forget. Local curiosity shifted to unease. The guesthouse cat, usually friendly, refused to enter Lena's room. Birds stopped perching near her window. Even children who played in the street began to avoid that side of the house. A boy said he saw Lena standing in the yard at night, arms raised to the sky, her eyes glowing white. His mother said it was a dream. But the boy swore it was real, and that something glowed back in the clouds. Then there was the language. A linguist visiting Reykjavik for a folklore conference happened to overhear Lena speak in a cafe. He introduced himself, intrigued by her fluency, but then paled when she said a specific phrase, 3 words, that, according to him, hadn't been spoken in over 1,000 years. It's Old Norse, he explained to Kate later. But not just old, archaic. Ritualistic. Temple speak. Where the hell did she learn that? When shown Lena's sketches, his hands trembled. "These aren't decorations," he said. "They're maps. Protective ones. Or maybe warnings." Lena agreed to meet him again. She was different that day, less distant, more grounded. But when he asked her directly what she remembered from her disappearance, her expression changed. Something flickered behind her eyes. "It was like falling into a dream," she whispered. "But the dream was awake. Alive. I was watched from the moment I stepped off the path. They were waiting. I don't think it was an accident." He asked her what she meant. She said, "They showed me something. I wasn't supposed to see. But I did. And now it's in me." When pressed further, she went silent. For the rest of the meeting, she didn't speak again. That night, the linguist was found outside his hotel, collapsed from what doctors believed to be a stroke. His last words, according to the bellhop who found him, were, "She brought something back." He never woke up. Lena disappeared the next morning. Her phone was left behind, wiped clean. Her blog accounts were deleted. But 2 days later, the owner of a rural horse farm outside Akureyri reported seeing a barefoot woman walking through his fields at dawn, trailed by a thick band of mist that didn't lift even as the sun rose. The next time Kate heard from Lena, it wasn't a call. It was a postcard, delivered from a remote village near the Westfjords. It had no message. Just a drawing, an open eye with a spiral iris, and the words in Icelandic, "Not all who return are the same." When Kate flipped the card over, the sender's name was scratched out. But she knew the handwriting. And more chilling still, the ink shimmered faintly under the light, as though it weren't ink at all, but something alive. Kate didn't sleep much after the postcard arrived. She read and reread the spiral symbol until it haunted her dreams. She stopped going out after sunset, not because she believed something would happen, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, might be waiting just beyond the reach of light. She tried to rationalize it, to write it off as stress or worry, but then came the message from the University of Iceland. A professor in their folklore department had seen the symbols Lena had drawn and wanted to speak to her. He wouldn't say why over email. Just that it was urgent. And old. Kate flew back to Reykjavik. She met the professor in a narrow office packed with ancient texts and cracked stone artifacts. His name was Dr. Halti Egilson, a man in his 70s with eyes that didn't blink often enough and a limp he never explained. He was holding a folder when she entered. Without speaking, he spread out Lena's drawings on his desk, prints Kate had scanned and emailed weeks before. Then, from a locked cabinet, he pulled out an old manuscript wrapped in faded leather. Inside were etchings nearly identical to Lena's sketches. "This book is from the Skalholt Monastery," he said. 17th century. It was dismissed as delusion. But I don't think it is anymore. When Kate asked him what the drawings meant, he paused before answering. "They're memory traps. Seals. Used to bind vision, or hold something inside." He told her of an ancient tale, rarely spoken, not even among scholars. A hidden hollow, deep beneath the Icelandic crust, where time folds in on itself and the veil between worlds is thinnest. It was said that those who entered came out either gifted or broken, or not at all. The hollow, he said, wasn't on any map. But oral traditions across regions spoke of travelers vanishing and returning with the fire behind their eyes. It was considered myth, until Lena. "Your friend may have crossed into one of these pockets," he explained, "and brought something through that shouldn't be here." He warned Kate that continued contact could be dangerous. "Not for you," he added grimly. "For her." Kate asked him what could be done. Could Lena be helped? Brought back? The professor only shook his head. "She hasn't gone mad," he said. "She's remembering something the rest of us were meant to forget." That night, Kate booked a flight to Safja, the closest major town to the village that had postmarked Lena's postcard. It was a long shot, but she had nothing else to go on. The village, Skardaloo, sat nestled between cliffs and fjords, a scattering of wooden houses clinging to a coastline carved by glacier. She asked around. No one admitted to seeing Lena. But a girl about 8 years old tugged at her coat as she left the cafe and said, "You're looking for the fire woman." When Kate asked what she meant, the girl pointed toward the mountains and whispered, "She talks to the lights." That evening, Kate hiked in the direction the girl had indicated, her phone light barely piercing the dense twilight. The sky above was bursting with northern lights, green ribbons dancing like whispers across the stars. She nearly turned back twice, but just as she reached a stone outcrop overlooking the fjord, she saw her. Lena. Standing barefoot on a mossy rise, arms extended, eyes wide open and fixed on the sky. Her skin glowed faintly in the aurora's light, but it wasn't the light making her shimmer. It was something within her. Kate called her name. Lena didn't flinch. Then, suddenly, Lena turned. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile Kate remembered. It was distant. Reverent. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "They don't like visitors." Kate rushed forward, grabbing her by the shoulders, demanding answers. Lena reached out and touched Kate's forehead. In that instant, Kate saw something, not a memory, but a flood of sensation. A tunnel of fire beneath stone, voices not spoken but sung in frequencies that didn't belong to human throats, eyes peering from cracks in the rock, watching, waiting, beckoning. Then she was back, knees in the moss, gasping like she'd been drowning in her own mind. Lena was already walking away. Back in Safja, Kate checked into a hotel and tried to make sense of what had happened. That night, her dreams were filled with spirals, spinning faster and faster until they became tunnels. She awoke screaming. On the mirror, drawn in condensation, was that same open eye symbol. She packed her things and left Iceland the next day. But she didn't speak to anyone on the plane. Didn't answer calls. When her therapist asked what had happened, she said only this: "There's something old in that land. And it remembers her." A week later, a package arrived at her Brooklyn apartment. No sender. Inside, one of Lena's sketchbooks, filled to the last page. But the final drawing wasn't a symbol. It was a figure, tall, black-eyed, with tendrils for limbs and fire in its throat. Below it, scribbled in shaking hand, "You can't close a door once it's opened." Lena had always believed in science. Her undergraduate thesis was on geothermic fault lines, her nights spent measuring seismic vibrations and reading paleomagnetic data. So when she first vanished, her logical mind tried to explain what happened. Some kind of hallucination from volcanic gas exposure, maybe a fugue state triggered by environmental stress. But when she returned to the highlands with Dr. Halti Eagleson by her side, the ground beneath her didn't feel like rock. It felt like memory. The professor insisted they travel in silence. He brought only a small leather satchel and refused to carry any digital equipment. "Technology hums too loudly," he said. "They don't like the interference." Lena didn't argue. She couldn't. Her dreams had grown louder over the past week, more vivid, more demanding. Each night she woke in a sweat, the same whisper ringing in her head: "Come back. Come deeper. We remember." The journey to the site took them through a forgotten stretch of the Icelandic interior, where even shepherds dared not graze their sheep. Locals called it the Hraundala Rift, a name absent from any current geological records. But Eagleson had maps, ones passed down orally for generations, not drawn in ink but in recitation. The air changed as they walked. It was heavier, not with pressure but with presence. Birds stopped chirping. Wind lost its whistle. The silence was not empty. It was full. Like the land itself was holding its breath. Lena didn't need to be led. Her feet seemed to know the way, drawn toward something ancient, something that pulsed just beneath the surface. The professor followed without speaking. When they reached the mouth of a ravine flanked by walls of black volcanic glass, Lena stopped. "Here," she said, though she didn't know how she knew. They descended into the ravine slowly, the temperature dropping with every step. Steam hissed faintly from unseen vents, and the moss beneath their boots grew phosphorescent in patches, glowing faintly with a bluish hue. At the bottom lay a pool, mirror-like, untouched by wind or wildlife. Lena approached it and knelt. She dipped her hand into the water. It wasn't cold or hot, it was wrong. Like touching time itself. It rippled once, and something stirred beneath. Not a creature, not a fish, but a shape. A suggestion. Something with angles that didn't obey geometry. She stood and turned to Eagleson. "It's not a place," she said. "It's a threshold." He nodded slowly. "And what lies beyond it does not forget." As they pressed forward through a narrow rock fissure just behind the pool, the walls began to shift. Not visibly, but in perception. Lena felt like she was walking forward and falling backward at the same time. Her breath came faster, and her skin began to tingle, not with cold, but anticipation. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber, circular, vast, and impossibly ancient. There were no markings, no tools, no indication it had been built by human hands. And yet the architecture felt intentional, as though it were designed for minds not bound by flesh. The walls seemed to pulse, faintly, with bioluminescence or thought or both. And at the center of the chamber, embedded in the ground, was a spiral of black stone that matched the one Lena had seen in her dreams. When she stepped onto the spiral, the air shifted. Not just around her, but inside her. She heard them again. Not voices, not quite. Impressions. Questions posed in emotion, not language. A test. A remembrance. Something asked her, "Do you still want to know?" She didn't answer with words. She didn't have to. Her presence was the answer. The spiral lit beneath her feet, section by section, glowing amber like embers reigniting. The chamber dimmed. And then something moved. A crack opened in the wall, not a door, but a membrane. A veil. And beyond it, darkness breathed. Eagleson stepped back, face pale. "This wasn't meant for us," he whispered. But Lena didn't move. She looked into the veil, her expression unreadable. "I've seen this before," she murmured. "Not here. But before I was born." Eagleson tried to pull her back. She turned to him slowly, and in that moment, he saw something that made his knees buckle. Her eyes weren't just reflecting the light, they were refracting it, bending it, holding shapes that no retina should contain. He fell to the floor, weeping without knowing why. Lena stepped forward, through the veil, and the chamber shuddered. The lights flickered. Eagleson heard music then, a low, droning tone that made his teeth ache and his bones feel loose inside his skin. Then silence. Lena was gone. The veil sealed. The spiral dimmed. He lay there for what felt like hours, until he found the strength to crawl back through the fissure, out of the ravine, into daylight. Days passed. He waited in Reykjavik, watching his door, expecting her to reappear. On the 7th night, she did. She didn't knock. She simply appeared in the hallway, barefoot and calm. "I remember now," she said. Her voice echoed strangely, as though two versions of her had spoken at once. He didn't ask her what she saw. He couldn't. But she answered anyway. "It's not another world," she whispered. "It's our own. Just older. Deeper. The layer beneath all this." She touched his hand. "It's still there. Waiting." She left before dawn. In the place where she'd stood, Eagleson found a piece of stone, black, spiral-shaped, and warm to the touch. When he looked at it under magnification, he saw movement. Not chemical. Not bacterial. But something else. Watching. The days following Lena's return from the chamber passed in a blur, or perhaps they didn't pass at all. Time around her began to feel elastic, unpredictable, as though reality itself had become untethered. The professor, shaken and weary, no longer questioned her presence. He became more of an observer than a guide, trailing her movements in silence, watching as she drifted between stillness and intensity like a tide. Lena didn't speak much, but when she did, her words came layered, as if two voices occupied the same mouth. She no longer ate. Her reflection in mirrors blurred at the edges. And when she stood near electronics, screens flickered and lights dimmed, even when the power had not been touched. The transformation wasn't physical in the grotesque sense. Her body remained intact, her skin unmarked. But she had changed in a way that escaped measurement. She was no longer completely Lena Roth. She was someone, or something, wearing her memory. The truth didn't come all at once. It leaked out slowly, like water through cracked stone. She began writing again, but not in journals. She scratched symbols into wood, glass, rock. Her hands moved of their own accord, driven by rhythm instead of thought. The symbols pulsed in sequence, patterns forming across surfaces, like a language unfolding itself backwards. It was only when Eagleson filmed her hands during a trance that he began to understand. He played the footage back frame by frame, slowing it further, until it wasn't movement at all, it was geometry. She was drawing sigils in cycles, and each rotation revealed deeper layers beneath the last. He froze one frame, enhanced it, overlaid it onto an Old Norse manuscript, and then a Proto-Sumerian text. It matched both, and neither. It was a language of intention, not sound. Lena wasn't writing. She was remembering. Transmitting. One morning, she stood in the field behind the guest house, her bare feet pressed into the soil. She extended her arms, closed her eyes, and began to hum, not a tune, but a resonance, low and primal. Eagleson, who had stepped outside with his tea, froze mid-step. The air around her shimmered, heat waves in cold air, and the ground beneath her darkened, the green of moss fading to black. He dropped the cup. When he looked again, Lena was gone. In her place, scorched grass in a perfect spiral. She returned hours later, walking down the center of the road with her hands smeared in ash. She looked older somehow, not aged, but deeper, as though her body now held centuries instead of decades. That night, she told Eagleson everything. It was not a story in the traditional sense. It came in fragments, sentences scattered through silence. She had not just seen the hollow. She had stood in its center, surrounded by entities older than names. They were not gods, not spirits, not aliens. They were remnants. Keepers of memory. Custodians of a world that had existed parallel to ours, beneath ours, inside ours, layered in dimensions that bent light and language. Time was different there. She had lived lives. She had died. Returned. Watched humanity crawl from its own forgetfulness. They had not abducted her. She had been invited. Or perhaps chosen. There were others, she said. Not many. But some. Wanderers who disappeared in ancient lands and returned changed. Shamans, prophets, the possessed. Society labeled them mad because they spoke truths the world wasn't built to hold. The hollow didn't reveal secrets, it uncovered memory. Human memory. Ancient and buried. And it had shown Lena what she had once been, what she had forgotten. She had made a choice to return, to bring pieces of that place back with her. The price of knowledge was permanence. She could no longer fully be Lena. She was a vessel now. And yet, something had changed in the hollow too. Something stirred when she entered. Something that had not moved in millennia. She described it only once, late at night, sitting by a fire. It was watching the watchers, she said. Even they feared it. They called it the sleeper. The hollow had kept it buried. But Lena's presence, her memory, her resonance, had stirred it awake. She didn't know if it had followed her. Or if it had simply left through the same door she opened. But I hear it sometimes, she said, her voice trembling. In dreams. In reflections. It waits. That was the last conversation Eagleson ever had with her. The next morning, she was gone. Her room was undisturbed, bed untouched. No footprints outside. But the mirror in her room bore a single message etched in frost: it remembers you too. A week later, strange events began occurring across the region. Animals fleeing forests, compasses spinning wildly, seismic readings showing impossible fluctuations beneath tectonically stable ground. Eagleson reported it all. No one listened. He sent Lena's journals to universities, to paranormal researchers, to government agencies. No one responded. Months passed. Then, one night, Eagleson opened his door to find a woman standing barefoot on his porch. Her eyes were hollow with recognition. Her voice, though, was not Lena's. "We are looking," she said. And then she smiled, a smile so ancient and empty it didn't belong to any human face. She turned and walked into the dark. He never saw her again. But he sleeps with lights on now. And when he dreams of spirals. 6 months after Lena's final disappearance, the world had already begun to forget her. The blog was gone, the Instagram wiped. A few travel forums still held threads about her vanishing and miraculous return, but most users moved on, assuming it was either a hoax or a breakdown. Only those closest to her, Kate, Eagleson, and a handful of cryptic researchers, continued to search for meaning in what had happened. But they were chasing echoes. Lena had dissolved into myth, and myths are harder to follow than facts. What no one realized, however, was that Lena hadn't left the world entirely. She had become part of something older, something that was never meant to be awakened. And it was growing. Kate never returned to Iceland, but the country followed her. Shadows in her apartment stretched longer than they should. Her clocks ticked out of rhythm. Once, while scrolling through archived photos of Lena, her phone flashed static, then a single frame appeared that she hadn't taken. Lena in a mirror, her eyes all black, hands raised in a spiral. Then the phone died, refusing to turn on for 3 days. She tried to tell people, but their concern quickly turned to polite dismissal. One friend asked gently if she'd considered therapy. She had. The therapist's voice wavered when she mentioned Lena. "She's the girl who vanished, right?" he asked. "But didn't she come back different?" Kate never returned to that office again. Meanwhile, in Iceland, the land began to shift in subtle ways. A new geothermal vent opened near Hraundala, spewing mist with no known source. Plants grew in impossible patterns, spirals, rings, glyphs etched into moss. Livestock began disappearing from farms near the old ravine, and when found, the animals' eyes were gone, but their bodies were untouched. Locals whispered of strange music echoing through the rocks at night, of dreams that pulled them into dark tunnels lit by amber veins. A shepherd claimed he saw a woman walking along the ridge barefoot, glowing faintly, mouthing words that made the earth tremble. No one believed him until he was found catatonic, staring into the sun, whispering she's not alone over and over. Egilson withdrew completely. He boarded up his home, stopped answering calls. He spent every night at his desk, surrounded by Lena's sketches and ancient manuscripts. He tried to map what she had drawn, coordinates, ley lines, quantum anomalies, but none of it aligned. Then, late one night, he made a breakthrough. He realized the symbols weren't maps of terrain. They were maps of consciousness. Each spiral, each shape, was a state of mind, a pattern of memory encoded into reality itself. Lena hadn't just crossed a physical threshold. She had activated something dormant within the world's mind, something coiled like a serpent beneath our collective perception. Something that fed on awareness. That explained why people forgot her so easily. The thing she brought back was not just watching. It was editing. Removing traces. Cleaning up after itself like a surgeon suturing a wound. But it hadn't finished. There were still pieces left, residues of her scattered in objects, places, and people. Kate began to experience episodes. Lost time, waking dreams. She once woke with muddy footprints on her carpet and moss in her hair. Cameras she installed in her apartment showed static for hours, then snapped back on just in time to catch her murmuring to herself in a language no one could identify. She feared she was being haunted. But it wasn't a ghost. It was a call. The final confirmation came in winter, when a storm unearthed something near the original ravine. A group of hikers found a stone doorway exposed beneath a landslide, carved with symbols matching Lena's drawings. The government sealed the area within 24 hours. But not before one of the hikers, a woman named Aldis, began exhibiting strange symptoms: loss of appetite, fragmented speech, night terrors. She claimed to see a woman in her dreams, standing in spirals of fire, smiling through a veil of smoke. Her eyes flickered like distant galaxies. The last thing Aldis said before slipping into a coma was, "She's remembering more. So will we." Kate now lives off the grid. She avoids mirrors. She avoids spirals. But sometimes, late at night, she finds herself humming low tones she's never heard before. Sometimes she sees reflections in windows where no one stands. And sometimes, most disturbingly, she finds new drawings in her journals that she knows she didn't create. Always spirals. Always symbols. Always accompanied by a single line in shaky handwriting: "You are the door now." Lena's story didn't end when she disappeared. It began there. Because what she brought back wasn't a creature. It wasn't a curse. It was a seed. A fragment of ancient memory reawakened. A piece of the world's forgotten history trying to bloom again. Through thoughts, through dreams, through the people who dare to look too long at the space between facts. And it's spreading. Quietly. Patiently. Through symbols, through song, through the fire that remembers. Somewhere out there, Lena still walks, barefoot, glowing faintly, humming the song of the hollow. And as she moves, more people begin to remember. Which begs the question: if you're hearing this, if you're watching this, what has already been awakened in you?